Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. April 18th, 2018.
The Kuhner Report is powered by Kelly Financial Services. Cleaning up your financial bull. Get the peace of mind that you deserve at Kelly Financial Services.
Hello, this is James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. I feel good. You're checking out my man, Mike Siegel. Hit it, buddy. Hit it, buddy. Hit it, buddy.
Well, folks, welcome back in. Good to have you with us on the Kuhner Report. Mike Siegel in for Jeff today through the rest of the week. He has a few days off, well-deserved, and we're delighted to be here with you as we get into our conversation. Right off the bat, we are joined by a gentleman who has the greatest expertise on our military strategy and tactics and really policy relationships with other countries, how to deal with that. He's the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. He's a Fox News military analyst, and we're always appreciative of his time. 4-star general retired, General Jack Keane. General, it's always a pleasure and a privilege. How are you, sir?
Yeah, it's good to be here with you and your audience, Mike.
Thank you. Let me start with Syria. I was thinking about this. I want to go back to a press conference that President George W. Bush held with the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, going back a number of years, obviously. But at that time, the General Sharon, Prime Minister Sharon, made the point that Mossad had determined that Iraq obviously had chemical weapons. I mean, we all know that they killed hundreds of Kurds using those, but that Mossad found that in the middle of the night, they had gone in trucks, taken those weapons across to Syria. And so, of course, now we see Syria has used those chemical weapons. My point being that we went in, and of course, Iraq had nothing at that time. Saddam knew we'd be inspecting, so he sent them out of the country for good safe haven in Syria. How do we know that Syria didn't do the same thing with the attacks that we just made recently, that they might have moved the important material from those locations, knowing that those would be attacked?
Well, I suspect we don't know for certain. This much we do know. The Russians were supposed to get all the weapons, chemical weapons that Assad had out of there. And, of course, it was absolutely foolishness, for our government to depend on the Russians to do that. So we do know for a fact that Assad did not give up all of his chemical weapons, nor did he give up all of his production sites. And that's been in open press for some time, ever since those inspections were taking place back in 2014. So, and also he has a production capability that he's added to, and the Iranians help him with chemical weapons as well. So Assad will have chemical weapons until somebody takes them away from him and takes his delivery system away from him. Did
we accomplish any of that? I mean, I don't know if we even know yet totally what we did, but have we damaged him substantially to the point that it will take him perhaps years to recover, or is this just another little glitch that he'll come back from quickly?
We haven't even come close. Let's assume it accomplished what it's supposed to do. We hit 3 targets. One was a research center, and the other 2 were storage facilities. One had a production capability to it. Even if assuming we did that, he has other weapons at other storage sites and other production capabilities. So that's a fact. And secondly, we didn't take any of the delivery means out. I think we should have, on this strike, given the first strike, Mike, was to deter him from using chemical weapons. He came back a year later and used those weapons again, so he obviously was not deterred. I believe we should have changed the purpose of the strike, not to try to deter him again, but to stop him from having the capability to use the weapons again. So take out all of the air delivery means, both fixed wing and rotary wing. Take out his artillery and take out all of his air power infrastructure. If you do that, then you set him back years in terms of his ability to deliver chemical weapons. Now, what about the other chemical sites? Well, the way you destroy chemical weapons that are buried into the ground, you have to incinerate them, and we have special bombs to do that. If there's a civilian area that's close by, we're going to be reluctant to do it because we may have civilian casualties, and I'm sure that's the targeters and planners who will put this strike together were taking that into consideration. So I doubt seriously that using bombs would we ever be able to eliminate Assad's total chemical weapons inventory. That's why I've been pressing to take away his total delivery means, and you accomplish the same thing. But we did not do that.
That was my thought, and I'm glad you make that point, General, because if you take away the aircraft, he has no way to deliver the chemical weapons, the weapons of mass destruction. So it would have eliminated the problem. We went after one of the airfields last time. Why do you think we didn't do that this time?
Well, here's what I've been led to believe. I mean, I was not in the room when the Pentagon made the presentation to the president and his national security team writ large. But I've been told that the Russians, after the last strike that we did a year ago, staged at the other airfields. There's 6 operational airfields he uses to conduct his murderous air campaign. They staged Russians at all of these airfields, low-level Russian personnel, not necessarily military, some of them technicians, with the purpose in mind to discourage the United States from attacking those airfields because they could harm Russian personnel. And if that dissuaded us, I think that's a mistaken and misguided judgment on our part. Because what we should have done, let's assume those Russians are there as it's been reported, after the chemical weapon strike, tell the Russians that every military base, Syrian military base in Syria, is now vulnerable to an attack as a result of Assad's just use of chemical weapons. And we, the United States, are not going to be held accountable for your personnel at those bases. It's up to you to act responsibly if you don't want them to be hurt. And then go ahead and take all those bases down and shut him down for years in his capacity to deliver. Because you don't destroy the airplanes. You take out all the aviation fuel, aviation munitions, aviation warehouses that provide all the repair parts to keep those airplanes going. Now, the Russians could give him an airplane, change insignia on it, and he could use that, to conduct a chemical weapon strike sometime in the future. So that option is certainly out there. But we would have really crippled him rather significantly if we had done what I'm suggesting.
What's puzzling to me is that, I mean, from what you're telling us, and obviously if you know it, the Pentagon knows it, he could turn around theoretically next week, and if he wanted to, I'm sure it's not going to happen quickly, but he could do another chemical weapon attack almost any time, couldn't he, if he chose to do it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do it tomorrow if he wanted to. Here's what I think is going on in Assad's head. He has been, for 6+ years, almost 7 years, he's been trying to secure his capital, Damascus, from opposition forces inside his capital. Ghouta represented the last major neighborhood. Now, this is a neighborhood that has hundreds of thousands of people in it. And he systematically began a very heavy conventional bombing campaign. The Russians were participating in this. They took down hospitals. They took down underground hospitals. It was a brutal campaign. He got down to one town left, Douma, which was a rebel stronghold, and they were holding out there. Again, pounded it day in, day out, day in, day out. They didn't leave. So he said, okay, I'm going to use chemical weapons. I know I'll force them to leave once I do that. And he calculates that so I can secure Damascus finally, I'll use chemical weapons, even though I know the United States will conduct an attack on me. But my calculation is it'll be a small attack, not a big one, and it'll be worth the price. And he was right on the money. That's why you see him taking a victory lap sort of the next day and people running around waving flags. I mean, certainly that's propaganda, too, thrown in there. By the way, after the chemical weapons hit, the rebels were gone within 6 hours, never to be seen in that place again.
So he was successful, but then, what you're telling us, General, is that basically what we did might even be worse than having done nothing, because by doing that and his being successful, and theoretically, I'm not suggesting he's going to do it, next week, next month, tomorrow, as you said, he does another chemical weapons attack, we have egg on our face because the attack was much ado about nothing then, and here we are, the most powerful group in the world. I mean, talking France, Great Britain, the United States, and what we did would have had little or no impact on what Syria's policies were militarily with weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's his calculation. Now, he's not going to use it indiscriminately. I mean, he sees it as a weapon that's in his military toolkit, and it has military purposes. And if you look at it just clinically, not humanitarianly, and not from a moral perspective, he's right about that. It has a military application, and it's a psychological, emotional, intimidating, terrorizing weapon. And when you use it, it usually gets you a favorable outcome as opposed to your enemy. So he would only use it when he believes it's absolutely necessary, as he had in this case. He wouldn't do it indiscriminately because he knows he's going to pay a price for it. But the elephant in the room here, Mike, so our audience understands, is some of our leaders believe that if we attack those airfields with those Russians there and say we did kill some of those Russians, the Russians had told us, if you kill any of our people, we have no choice but to escalate. So if you're unwilling to climb the escalator ladder with the Russians, then you fold your hand. And that's kind of what we did. Now, I believe that the Russians, if you look at this from a logic perspective, the Russians are just about ready to put up the W on Syria with the Iranians, having successfully propped up the Assad regime as they're consolidating what's left of the rebel strongholds in western Syria. I mean, they got what they wanted out of this thing, and that's Assad in power indefinitely, or an Alawite in power indefinitely. Why would the Russians pick a fight with the United States and start shooting down U.S. airplanes or starting to bomb U.S. troops on the ground in Syria when the President of the United States has already said he's willing to leave? Why would they bring the United States into a conventional war over Syria? The Russians are not going to do that. They will flat not do that. And here's another reason why. We have overwhelming combat power against them. I mean, Russia is a second-rate power militarily compared to us, pretending it's a superpower and throwing its muscle around. They know full well that they're offset geographically from their mother country. They're very powerful up in Eastern Europe next to their border, but offset geographically, we got real muscle and combat power in that region there, and they would never pick a fight with us that could lead to significant escalation.
General, there are many conservatives now saying that the president was wrong and betrayed his point about leaving Syria, about not being an expansionist, so to speak. So he's put himself in a position of some criticism from people who normally support him. The other part of that is that, look, Syria is going to be, if we leave, doesn't that create the same vacuum as we did in Iraq? And I realize that in this case, the job was to get ISIS. But do we have any interest in taking out Assad? And what about Russia and Iran as the 800-pound gorillas in the room in that country?
Well, first of all, there's thousands of ISIS still left. And we've got to clean that up. And I think the president, people have gone back to the president after he made those statements, and he has since adjusted his statement, saying that we're going to finish ISIS. So they told him we'll still be at that for some months to be able to clean that up. But what he's walking away from is the same problem that Obama walked away from in Iraq. It's not enough just to finish the conflict on favorable terms to us. You got to win the peace that follows after it. And when you walk away from that, there's likelihood that your enemy is going to reemerge. If we walk away from the recovery operation that the State Department and others are planning in the area where we've done all of this bombing to drive ISIS out, they want to put the electricity, get the electricity back, get the water running, reconstruct some schools, do some basic survival things to invest in that community that we helped destroy. I mean, obviously, ISIS also helped destroy with IEDs, and put those people back on some kind of a steady footing. If we pull away and just walk away and say, okay, this is your problem, like Obama did, it's likely ISIS will be able to go right back in there and recruit a lot of those people because they will be fundamentally disillusioned. No one cares about them after all of this destruction took place. And you wind up losing the peace, as a result of it, and you get an enemy coming right back at you. That's the mistake that we made. When we stayed post-conflict, like we did post-World War II, Mike, in Germany, in Italy, in Japan, post-Korean War in South Korea, in Bosnia-Herzegovina for almost 10 years. And we're not taking casualties, but we're helping to stabilize and recover those countries. That was all successful. When we pick up our bags and leave, like we did in Vietnam, in Somalia, in Iraq, and never help the new regime in Libya, there's disastrous impacts. And that's the concern I got. This thing will just get considerably worse. And the Iranians are conducting a military buildup in Syria right now to encroach on the Israelis. And it has really got Israel's attention.
Well, yeah, they're dealing with it. So you're basically making the point that struck me is that we need to stay there with some level of American force in order to protect against the reemergence of ISIS and the damage that Assad could do in terms of all of the chemical warfare. Before we close, I got to ask you about North Korea, because it's breaking now, of course. As you know, the Secretary of State designate, Mike Pompeo, has met with Kim Jong-un, and that's remarkable, to say the least. And now they're talking about one of 5 locations for a meeting, maybe by no later than early June. How serious do you think this is to denuclearize Kim Jong-un?
Well, I'm getting more optimistic now, because what the president did, I mean, we had other people, talking to the regime over there, and we obviously had the South Koreans. So he sends an emissary with the stature of Pompeo, and I have spoken to Pompeo one-on-one on North Korea over at the CIA. So he's very clear-eyed about North Korea. He understands exactly where they're coming from, and he's got a insight into Kim Jong-un himself based on the work his agency has done. So he goes over there, and I think he has one thing in mind, to stress test Kim Jong-un. Is he really serious, or is he just doing what his predecessors have always done, and that's playing us and manipulating us and lying to us just to go into negotiations, to get concessions and to buy time? That was why Pompeo was looking him in the eye, to put questions in front of him and stress test him in terms of his determinations and sincerity about what he's about to do with President Trump. So I believe the fact that meeting with the leaders is still on is because Pompeo came back to him and said, "Hey, boss, I think this guy's serious. I think there's a chance we can pull this off, that we can denuclearize. And we're going to have to give some things to him, and we don't know what that is. I'm sure Kim Jong-un gave Pompeo some idea what he wants in return. But in Pompeo's mind, and now the president's mind, there's a possibility of a very historic deal here, or he would not be going forward. And so that's the value of sending somebody like Pompeo over there.
Real quick, would it be fair to say that when Kim Jong-un went to Beijing, that President Xi read him the Riot Act and said, cut a deal, get it done, denuclearize, we don't need problems with the United States?
It's definitely possible. And even though we're going to go into the summit, we have to still have, some healthy skepticism here, because history is on the side of the liars and the manipulators, as opposed to what's being told to us now. But nonetheless, it appears that this president has made progress in a way that our 3 previous presidents never even came close. And there certainly is potential here. And we're going to see something happen here. If the 2 Korean leaders, if they end the armistice and they say that they're going to pull their troops off the demilitarized zone and we're going to go back to normal border control as opposed to having their armies facing each other at each other's throats. If that comes out of that, and there's sort of a formal peace agreement that even the United States and China would be signatories to, in addition to those 2 countries, if that is a possibility coming out of those 2 meetings, that's a positive telltale sign that the meeting with Trump and Kim Jong-un is likely to be positive.
Great ending to our conversation, General. It's always good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Always a pleasure, sir.
Yeah. Okay, good talking to you, Mike.
You take care. All right, we're going to come right back to it. The Kuhner Report, Mike Siegel, and 617-266-6868 is the number to Boston. We come back with much more. 1225 at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. We're back at it, coming up to 12:28 at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Howard in Rockland, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. You got about a minute. Go right ahead.
Hello, Mike. One thing I wanted to ask the general is, it's a question of money. In wars, whoever runs out of money first usually loses the war.
Well, you know what's going to happen is that we're going to see, without question, the reality that Russia, Iran supplies the money to all the terrorists, and they'll do the same with Syria.
But if America runs out of money, it can't fight Syria, Iran, or anybody else. North Korea, China, Russia, etc.
Well, Iran's not going to run out of money unless we squeeze them.
That's what I'm saying, Mike. USA running out of money.
Well, we're not going to run out of money either. But the question is whether we have the will to spend it in Syria, and I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
Well, hold on, real quick. Every time we have one of these government shops, where the money has to be reinvigorated because of a closed ceiling on deficit spending, that's for the U.S. military. Otherwise, they don't get paid. If the U.S. military doesn't get paid, there ain't going to be any more war against anybody.
Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's not the imminent issue here. The imminent issue is whether we have the will to do it. We'll talk about it more.
It's the concurrent. Mike, it's the never-ending issue. If USA runs out of money to pay the troops won't fight.
We aren't going to run out of money to pay our troops. We just got $700 billion for this year, $716 billion for next year
on deficit spending.
Well, when have we not had deficit spending? You have to go back to Bill Clinton and
we have to
John
fund
Kennedy.
Deficit spending with Treasury bill accumulation, and that's
I know. Well, you can go through that. The fact is, we're not going to allow that to happen. I appreciate the call, but that's not going to be the issue. The issue is whether we have the will to actually go about the process of dealing with staying in Syria. Now, I'll be glad to get your calls about that. 617-266-6868. Should we stay in Syria is the question. As the general said, otherwise it's going to collapse again. At the Voice of Boston, WRKO.
WRKO, the Voice of Boston.
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
12:35 it is. Back we are at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Mike Siegel in for Jeff Kuhner on the Kuhner Report. General Jack Keane giving us the background on Syria, some background on North Korea. And really the question is, why did we do what we did in Syria with two other countries, three countries with certainly great knowledge about military strategy? And as General Keane pointed out, what we did is basically a blip on the radar screen for Syria in terms of its use of chemical weapons. This did not destroy Assad's ability to use chemical weapons at all. And now the question is, do we have egg on our face and have to stay there? Should we stay there? And so we'll get to your calls about that. And by the way, there is no way that we're not going to be paying our military. That has never happened. I realize with Obama, they never got raises, and even some military people qualified for food stamps, but that's all changing. Raises are going through, and we're not going to have a military that doesn't get paid. The real point is, do we have the will to stay in Syria? Should we stay in Syria with some level of troop force? Because the general said if you want to keep control over ISIS coming back, and don't forget, you get new people. People living in that country are living in a condition of desperation. People who have no other hope. So the bottom line is, why should they even bother to follow any kind of civility? ISIS offers an option and an alternative, arguably, to those people who are in desperate straits. Let's go to Arthur in Chestnut Hill. Arthur, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call, Mike, and it's great to hear you on the radio. Well, the Middle East is going to be a hotbed, till we die and afterwards. Nothing's ever going to change there. There's too many factions, and while we did a cosmetic bombing again, we're probably going to have to deal with it again, Mike.
Well, and the question becomes: do we stay there or leave and then have to go back if something else happens?
Well, you know something, General Keane is right. I mean, there has never been a conflict that we've been involved with that we've never kept a presence. Look at I was in Korea for a year, 30 miles south of the DMZ.
There you go.
That's a common place that we have bases all over South Korea, and it's just been in Japan we turned that whole attitude of the people and the government around. So I mean, everywhere that it's winning the peace, as he said. We lost the peace in Iraq, and then Obama turned around and sealed it for us. But before I go, I'd like to ask you to comment about something that's near and dear to me, and that is, why is there such silence about the Black Caucus's support for Farrakhan? When they call all of us racist, and especially the president, and there is no more outspoken racist or hate speech artist than Farrakhan, who rails against Jews and calls Hitler a great man and hates white people. And he's so outspoken about it, and these people all embrace this man, and yet they have the nerve to call anybody else, call the rest of us a racist.
You raised the point. I agree with you. We'll see what response there is. Thank you for calling.
Okay.
And you're absolutely right.
Well.
You too. Jimmy in Dorchester, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Good afternoon, Mike. What I want to ask you, there's 4 countries that seem to have an interest in Syria. And, we lofted 66 missiles. That cost us 1.4 from Raytheon. The British, 8 missiles. The French, 7. There's 4 countries that are interested in carving up Syria if we ever do take down Syria. And you know who's going to be Uncle Sucker or us? You know what the 4 countries are? France.
Turkey's one of them.
Oh, well, France is one of them. Now listen to this. Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also Britain. So make it 5 countries where they want to cut it up into sections. But we're the ones that would lose our boys, where we shouldn't lose our boys or girls there. We shouldn't be Uncle Sucker. We should leave there. I'm serious.
All right. I understand. Listen, everybody would like to do that. But the reality of the world is, all right, so if you leave, and I thank you for calling. It's good to talk to you. Look, if you leave, you got to recognize that, you know, that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is going to recreate the caliphate. Assad's not going to want to fight ISIS. He's going to go back to where he was and create that caliphate all over again, just the way they created it in Iraq. If we're not there, when we left Iraq, that's when ISIS moved into the void. George W. Bush, our former president, warned about that at that time. So you've got to make a choice, and that's what's unfortunate about this. But I appreciate the call, and there's no easy choice here. Let's go to Russ in Boston. Russ, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
First of all, Mike, I really enjoyed the General's comments because I felt the same way exactly he did in reference to Russia. And let's face it, they can easily be bankrupt and run out of money. The other thing is they don't all have all those countries as buffer zones, and they would turn against them. And there's no way the Russians are going to get into a full-scale war with us.
I agree with you, by the way, because it's really similar to the Soviet Union. When Ronald Reagan was president, then George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, I should say, right. When the Soviet Union broke up during President Bush's years, instigated by Ronald Reagan's years, the fact was that they were broke. They couldn't sustain the Soviet Union, and they right now they're in horrific economic shape. And thanks to the president allowing us to explore for oil and natural gas, we're becoming independent in those fields. We're able to sell those products to Western Europe. That will undermine Russia's one area, which is these resources that they've been depending on. And if we cut back their ability to sell to Western Europe, that cuts the economy of of Russia nowadays dramatically. And that means that they'll have really minimal ability to build up any kind of military capability.
Also, Mike, they're not going to get that pipeline, that gas pipeline that they need running underneath the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany. They won't get that if they start a full-scale war with us or the rest of Europe. The other thing I want to add is that gentleman that called that the United States is going to go bankrupt, what he doesn't understand is, since we're the world's reserve currency, we can print money. And fortunately, there are no countries out there on the face of the earth at this time or anywhere near this time that could ever become the world's reserve currency. China, for an example, would have to change its form of government and become a democracy before it would be allowed to be the world's reserve currency.
It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
There's always an outside possibility. There's been talk about it, but the bottom line is this country is too important to the rest of the world as frankly consumers. We consume more than any other country in the world or any other group of countries in the world. So it's not going away. They want the United States to exploit our economy, ship their products into the United States, which China does all day long. Thank you for calling, too. Good to talk to you, Russ. Let's go to Scott in Weymouth. Scott, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Michael, what's up? My pleasure, my friend.
How you doing?
You're filling in for Kuhner, if you don't mind me asking. Where's your regular slot? I'd like to know. I like you. Where are you at?
I do a nighttime nationally syndicated show. I don't know if I should.
That's
if you
okay.
You could Google and find out.
Okay, fair enough. All right, I have a comment on Syria, and if granted the time, I know I'm moving the goalposts, but I'd like to talk about Comey real quick, if granted the time. Syria is quickly realizing that we have a president in the White House that isn't messing around. He says what he means what he says, and if they act up again, we're going to hit him harder. Now, I'm an isolationist at heart, Michael. I really am. If two countries are fighting each other, I say stay out of the way. I don't have an 18-year-old son, but if I did, I don't want my 18-year-old dying for another country's war. However, when it comes down to humanitarian stuff, like a government is killing their citizens, babies, kids, women, children, with chemicals or nerve gas, I believe it's incumbent on us as the leaders in the world to act. So you say, how long should we be there? I say not long at all. It should be just airstrikes, but take them out. Hit them and hit them hard. And I'm not afraid of Russia. I'm really not. I think they're bluffing. They're playing a game of poker. Oh, you better not bomb Syria. We back them. You know what? Well, we're going to stand up for the people of Syria that are getting chemically destroyed, their kids. And if you got a problem, step up to the plate. We'll bomb you too.
Yeah, no, I understand your point, but as you saw when we took out the caliphate, it could not be done from the air. Ending it in Raqqa, Syria, and in Mosul in Iraq had to be done on the ground. Mostly Iraqi troops, but there were some Iranian troops as well, which gives them an inroad into Syria, which means that if they rebuild that caliphate, you're going to have to go back in on the ground and do the same thing all over again. I mean, that's why they existed in the first place, because we pulled out of Iraq. If we left troops in Iraq, we never would have had the problem of ISIS creating a caliphate.
It really, Michael, it really is so complicated, the world. That's why, like, George Washington was an isolationist. And perhaps I'll withdraw my previous statement 2 minutes ago. Do we just stay away from everybody? And
I don't know.
I don't know either. What do you do? The world's a mess.
It's a tough. Thank you for calling. Well, look, I think that because Russia and Iran have an interest in Syria, and because if we leave, it's just going to recreate more terrorism. And look, there's still thousands of people out there who, as the general said, who are perfectly willing to go back to ISIS if they can recreate what they had previously. It's almost a never-ending problem. Tony in Chicago. Tony, you're on the Voice of Boston here, WRKO.
Hello, Mike. There are a number of prominent reporters in the media who are saying that we still do not have proof that Assad is responsible for the chemical attacks, and that list would include Michael Savage, Jeff Kuhner, Ann Coulter, Tucker Carlson, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, One News America, and millions of other Americans are saying that we don't have proof that Assad is responsible. How do you respond to that?
I think they're entitled to their opinions. I think that we haven't had tangible, substantive release of how they know it was Assad. The one thing that has been said publicly is that when you look at the video and you look at the symptoms and you look at the reactions of the victims and you look at the way they're foaming at the mouth and the way that they have responded to this, number one, I think everyone would agree it was a chemical attack. Number two, who would have the interest in it? As the general said, this was the one area that Assad wanted to neutralize, and so using that attack created the fear, and the fighters, the rebels, ran from Duma. They left. So you're right. And if you're talking about in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt, I'm not sure you have that. But looking at the circumstantial evidence, The overwhelming likelihood to me is that Syria did it. Having said that, then the second question becomes, even if that's true, do you go in and keep doing this? And if you do that, that means you have to stay there. And then the question becomes, do you want to stay in Syria? Knowing what happened in Iraq, you can replicate what happened with ISIS previously. You leave, they come back, and then it's Assad, and he's going to leave ISIS alone if they go back to Raqqa. He won't care about that area. So then what? But I think there's enough circumstantial evidence that it's way more likely than not that it was Assad.
Well, I'm just saying.
Who else has the delivery ability, by the way? He has the aircraft to do it. Who else has it?
Well, so some people are saying that there have been rebels who have been paid off to do these things. And Michael Savage said this is a false flag event and that evil powers of the world plan to steal land from Syria for oil pipelines, and that warmongers have hijacked our Constitution. Now, those are all quotes from Michael Savage, and there's a lot of other people saying the same thing. So I'm just saying, why are we going in there so quickly if we don't have absolute proof that Assad is responsible for these?
General Mattis is secure in that belief. You know, some of the people you mentioned, you're absolutely right. That's why I asked the general about the conservatives who have attacked the president for doing it. But you had 3 countries do it in this case. Great Britain is certainly confident that it was Assad. France was confident. So we need to leave it at that for the moment. But you're right. It's not absolutely indelibly proven. Kung in Boston, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Yeah, hi, Mike. Nice to talk to you. First time to talk to you. Let's go back to Syria's situation. There, you cannot have 100% absolute proof. As long as you get circumstances, evidence, plus the satellite will pick up the plane, leave the bunker, and went back. And right after that, the chemical attack. That's a false suspicion already. I mean, people just so bogged down to 100%. There's no 100% in life. There's no perfect situation. You go with what you got with the best estimate, and you go with your gut, and you do what you got to do. Now, about the troop in Syria, I don't think we should leave our men in Syria. Let Europe, let Arab country, let the liberal deal with the situation, because they talk about the blue wave is coming in. They're going to take control of the Congress, and then maybe a Senate, maybe the next president will be the liberal. So let them handle it. Just like Obama, kick the can down to the road. Let them handle the situation.
Yeah, make a good point, actually. That is a good point. Saudi Arabia certainly could do it. Qatar could send in a few troops. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, some of those, Egypt, Jordan, they certainly have trained militaries. And, you know, we could leave 500 or 1,000 American advisors to help those groups sustain the peace to the degree that they can. But you're right. I mean, it should be the people in the neighborhood who take care of it. In the end, that's where it should go. I agree with you, Kung, and I appreciate.
I mean, Europe right next to Syria. So let Europe countries deal with the problem. Why we have to be the one who takes over?
You know, the truth is, and thank you for calling. You make a good point. The truth is that those countries fear Iran. And so why shouldn't those countries go into Syria, which is basically a puppet of Iran, Syria is. So deal with that. I mean, that's the bottom line. Let those countries be the lead forces to protect their neighborhood. We shouldn't have to go thousands and thousands of miles to do that. But somebody needs to be there, or you're going to recreate ISIS and some of the other terrorism that went on in that neighborhood. Good. All right, we'll come right back to your calls at 617-266-6868. Top of the hour, we're joined by Ira Melman, Director of Media Relations at the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Lots happening in that field as well. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. We're back at it. Good to be with you. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner on the Kuhner Report at the Voice of Boston, WRKO, 1256. We go to your calls on this serious situation. Jerry in Cape Cod. Hello, Jerry. You're on the Voice of Boston. Oh, he's gone. Well, all right, Jerry. Enjoy the Cape. We go to Jim in Lowell. Jim, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Hello.
Yes, sir. I suggest our boys should come back home, because we can't stay in those countries to protect people who are fighting religious wars. The war in Syria is all about the Shiites and the Sunnis. So what should our boys do there? Why should they die in Syria?
Well, they shouldn't.
Let them come back home and let Trump use that money to go and build the walls.
He could do.
There.
I appreciate it and I thank you. Of course, the problem is that what happens in Syria after we leave could be like what happened in Iraq, and that does affect our national security. So we're right back at square one again. Let's go to Jim in Lowell. Jim, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Jim, you with us?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I got 3 points I want to try to make in regards to about the proof as to whether or not it was the Assad government. The French, I think, are supposed to have the proof that it was the Assad government, and I think it has something to do with the type of chemical that was employed. It was one that required a more complex processing that only a nation state would likely to have access to. It
was chlorine and sarin gas, so that does require mixing and more complicated putting together, and that's a deadly combination, by the way. All right. Very quickly, what's the other point?
The two other points. The Russians had interfered with the United Nations attempt at fact gathering. I don't know the complete story on it, but
we also know that the inspectors. And I appreciate the call. I've got to get some other calls in. We know the inspectors actually were shot at earlier today when they were going in to inspect. So it could be whether it's the Russians or whoever, rebels. I don't know who it was. Assad stopping them from doing their inspections. That's another part of this. They don't want it to be known. Stephen Mansfield, you're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO.
Hey, how's it going, Michael?
Good.
My point is, as far as the attack with the gas, is it didn't really make any sense for Assad to deploy anything like that because he knew exactly what would happen. The last time he supposedly did it, they still can't prove that happened. And this time, within 2 weeks of Trump announcing that he was thinking about pulling the troops out, the U.S. would have been out of Assad's way. So he's going to deploy chemical weapons knowing full well that that's going to bring a much larger U.S. military response. And it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It makes sense that the rebels might do it to keep the U.S. involved.
Well, as I said,
no sense for Russia or Syria to do.
Well, there would be sense if he wants to get rid of Duma as a problem. That would be why he would do it. And the fact that we were leaving publicly committed to doing that would give him more encouragement to do it. I don't know the answer. You could be correct that it's a very complicated situation, but he was the one that would benefit from that area being devoid of rebels, which now it is. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner on Voice of Boston, WRKO.
The Voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 100.7 WZLX HD2 Boston, an iHeart radio station.